So we're looking at the question that is of interest to us is how is China's ambitions in the Middle East paying off? We want to know how China has managed to present itself as an attractive option commensurate with its global ambitions. Hence the question, China's soft power projection in the Persian Gulf. The idea, and this it's going to come up when we discuss methodology. The idea was to look at a large number of Middle Eastern countries, especially in the Persian Gulf region, but the practicalities of the doing research in the region, meant that we could only gather enough data to look at two states, and that's Saudi Arabia and UAE. So our data set is a bit limited, and I have to thank Amin here for helping us include some data collection in Iran, but in the end, the number of responses we got was too limited to make it meaningful. So let's move on.
So the chairs, I guess we need.
Okay.
At least I wasn't the last one.
China is more attractive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we're looking at the soft power theoretical framework and using Joseph Nye, not really challenging what's in the literature in terms of soft power, and that is how a state can present itself as a role model for other countries to follow. And by doing so, get them to do things that is in the interest of the larger power projecting soft power. So it's more persuasion than coercion. That's the key here. And given that Joseph Nye has been writing about soft power projection using the US as a role, as an example, as a case study, there has been a lot of emphasis on the role of culture, the role of political values, liberal values, assuming that that's a universal value set, for how other states would then follow the US example. So that's our conceptual framework. Now, when we apply that to the China example, we have noticed that, first of all, China has taken the idea of soft power to heart. That is a big concern, a big ticket item for Chinese foreign policy making. They are consciously trying to promote China's image and soft power. And it has two very important aspects. One is to offset and perhaps respond to the negative image that is promoted against China. So it's responding to fears and concerns about China's ambitions. So offsetting the negativity. And of course, having soft power and attracting interest in the Middle East would be commensurate and would match China's global ambitions. What the Chinese have done, this is quite clear, is that they are now adding other examples, other assets to their soft power projection. So whereas Joseph Nye talks about soft power in terms of culture, ideology, universal values, the Chinese also see the importance of security, military power as feeding into the way China projects and promotes its soft power globally, and economic power, obviously. So what we have noticed is that China sees economic power and economic relations to be at the forefront of its soft power projection. It's quite evident and observable when we look at the number of agreements, arrangements that China has made with the region. agreements with Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE. There are comprehensive strategic agreements with those countries, strategic partnership agreements with Qatar. And of course, China has been increasingly joining military operations, exercises in the region with Iran, also involving Russia, which is quite significant. So China is prepared to engage in joint military exercises with Russia in the Persian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean. All of this feeds into how China sees itself as a major global power, as a major force for good in the Middle East. And the expectation is that this will enhance China's standing in the Middle East so that when issues pop up, issues of regional significance pop up, countries in the Middle East would side with China. That's how soft power works. When a UN resolution comes up and a number of General Assembly member states take a vote, do they vote with Russia? Do they vote with the US? Or do they vote with China? That's how soft power works. It's a good indicator. We have, as I mentioned, we wanted to do the survey. So this is looking at the recipient end. A lot of research is done on what China is doing. We don't want to replicate that. That's reinventing the wheel. We want to know how it is received in the region. So how ordinary citizens in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and elsewhere in the region see China's initiatives. Is China's policy making an impact? That's the puzzle for us. As I mentioned, we could not do other countries beyond UAE and Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, because it was just tough getting responses. We did subcontract the data collection to an agency in Jordan that conducted the survey and collected the results for us. Now, the survey is divided along 6 categories. General assessment of China. We looked at the economic attraction of China, whether China's economic model is something useful for these states to follow. Political values, whether the Chinese political system offers an alternative, a good alternative for these countries to follow. Cultural attraction, we did ask whether learning Chinese language is of interest to ordinary citizens in the region, whether they were aware of Chinese language, media, whether they would follow the news. Security aspects, looking at how China is seen as an impartial actor in the security field in the region. And then, of course, the Uyghur question. You can't run a project on China and not also address the treatment of Uyghur population. So the question there was, how aware are the citizens in UAE and Saudi Arabia of the Uyghur case and whether that impacts their attitude towards China? So with that, I'm going to stop and hand over to my colleague, Dr. Saba, who will go through the survey results.
Thanks, Shahram. Yes, as you mentioned, the issue of soft power is a key foreign policy issue for China, and it's been investing heavily in its projecting a good image of China to influence the region. For this reason, we conducted this public opinion to see whether it has been effective or not. And as Joseph and I has put soft power is something that it's a dance that you need a partner. So that's why we focused on this public opinion survey to see how the region views China in a way to show the effectiveness of China's soft power. So we constructed a set of questions, around 31 questions, multiple choice questions across 6 domains, as Shahram mentioned. But the first is the general assessment of China's role in the region. The question was, how do you assess China's role in the Middle East? The response that we got from Saudi Arabia and Qatar is the UAE is overwhelmingly positive. They see China's role in a positive way. And compared to the United States, it's quite, China is a bit more positively compared to the United States. So that was the first entry point of the overall view of China. Then we went through other questions, like in terms of trust, how the respondents sees China and the US that compare to each other in terms of the trust. Do they trust these two competing superpower? The question was, do you trust China as a reliable partner for your country? Again, as you see in the chart, it's quite the opposite. China is highly trusted compared to the United States, both in Saudi Arabia and also in the UAE. Part of the reason might be China is a new player. It does not carry those negative historical baggage that the United States has in the Middle East, decades of interventionism, different policies that often antagonizes the public. A good example of that would be the US support for Israel in recent conflicts, which really has impacted negatively the US perception in the Middle East among Muslim countries. So, as Shahram mentioned, this survey was conducted following the October 7th crisis or the outbreak of war between Gaza and Israel. So that might have influenced the result or the outcome of this survey. But it's still, as you can see, China is really highly trusted among the survey population. And the second domain that we assess China's attractiveness or influence in the region is through economic appeal, which is really the backbone of China's soft power strategy in the region, across the globe, actually. Again, as you can see, there's a strong preference for China in terms of trade, economic agreements. They largely see it in the interest of their countries, both Saudi respondents and the UAE respondents. Again, digging deeper on this economic engagement, the question was, I would like my country to build a stronger economic relation with China. Again, this question was designed in a way to compare different major powers or extra regional powers such as China, the United States, Japan, Russia, the EU, to see who is gaining more weight and more attraction in terms of the economic and trade agreements. Again, China tops the list. China overtakes Japan, Russia, the United States, the EU as the most preferred country for the respondents, their country to build stronger economic and trade relations with China. Again, in the political domain or political values, the story is similar. There's a strong preference for China as a development partner, and there is also a strong or relatively strong perception or acceptance of China's political model, which is mainly the role of a strong centralized states, focusing more on social stability rather than political values, liberal values, freedoms, human rights. So the role of a strong state, social stability, and economic development are the core of China's political model. And that system is also viewed positively by respondents in both target countries, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Again, we put this question more explicit, China's political system, the role of a strong state, social stability and economic development, and then versus the United States, focus on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Again, we see, as the chart shows, there's a strong agreement with China. That means that in terms of political values or the governance system, again, China has its appeal and attraction among the respondents in these two target countries. On the cultural domain, this is a bit of different, more nuances here compared to the economic, political, and the overall perception of China's role in the Middle East. We asked about if you decide to learn a foreign language, which language do you prefer to learn? We put English, Chinese, and any other language. But my main focus was English and Chinese. Again, we see English is still remains the dominant, the most favorite foreign language to learn among the respondents. This somehow reveals the dominance of English globally. Maybe it relates to the high quality of the educational institutions or tourist destinations across Europe and America. Two points is important here. China has been spending a lot to promote its culture, or the Chinese culture. It spends annually billions of dollars to promote Chinese language, which is the Confucius Institutes, expanding globally across the globe, especially in the Middle East as well. In all of these countries, China and the Middle East, they have these institutes that particularly focus on cultural exchanges, promoting the Chinese language, the learning of Chinese language, but also other educational exchanges. So this is not something that we should view as negative, but it is lagging compared to China's attractive in other domains, such as economic development, political values, and the overall perception of China. So this is not something negative, it's growing, but it has not paid off as compared to China's focus on attraction through trade economy, economic appeal in general. Next, we asked which of the following countries you wish to visit in terms of being the most favorite tourist destination. Again, we included China, Europe, Russia, United States, Japan, and other countries. Here, unlike the most preferred language, foreign language, China is scoring well. 34% of Saudis and 22% of UAE respondents have chosen China, but still Europe is leading here as the most favorite tourist destination. And the security domain and threat perception, again, it's quite self-explanatory. The United States contribution to regional peace and security, the result is quite similar in both countries for the United States. Whether the United States contribute to regional peace, security, and stability, the view is largely negative. When it comes to China, it's the opposite. It's highly positive. Most of the respondents, 56% of Saudi respondents and 51% of the UAE respondents, they view China's role, that it contributes to regional peace and security in a positive way, which is quite in a big contrast with the United States. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it might be that China is a new player, it doesn't carry those negative historical baggage, while the United States has been involved, meddling in that region for decades. We also added a question in light of the increasing geopolitical competition between the two countries, the United States and China. What is the basic strategy for your respective country, for the Saudi respondents and the UAE respondents? Interestingly, we found that a majority of respondents favor neutrality. They don't take sides with either the United States or China if this competition is heating up. But it's still, when you push further, if you have to choose between one of these two powers, beyond this neutrality, if neutrality is not an option, which country you would side by, the United States and China? As you can see in the chart, most of the respondents have chosen to stand by China. 29% of Saudi respondents and 26% of the UAE respondents have noted that they prefer their country to stand by China, the ongoing competition between the US and China. So this is another indication of China's appeal, influence in the region among the survey respondents. The sixth domain was different. It's not actually just to measure one key indicator when it comes to soft power, but it gives a sort of indication, because China has been criticized, condemned for how it's been treating the Uyghur Muslim populations. It's been accused of genocide, accused of committing crimes against humanity since 2017-18. So we included this to see how the region views this question, because it's been very controversial, and China has been fighting really hard to change the narrative or to push back against this narrative that China is committing atrocity crimes when it comes to this region of this minority group. We found that it's really not that the population is not following this news or what's happening with the Uyghur population. They do follow Chinese news channels, media, newspapers. But when it comes to the actual China's policies and the views of the region, how they view China, do they agree, do they disagree? The question was, how do you assess China's treatment of Uyghurs? There was a stronger position in Saudi Arabia compared to the UAE. For example, 41% of Saudi respondents, they said they oppose or strongly oppose China's policy towards the Uyghur population, while in UAE, 34% said that they oppose or strongly oppose such policies. Again, the majority have gone neutral. So the reason behind this, it's been a controversial issue, especially among Muslim countries in the Western context as well, that China has been committing. There are credible reports by the United Nations Human Rights, by other United Nations bodies, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, well documented. But why they have gone, most respondents have said that they are neutral. They neither disagree nor agree with that policy. For example, in Saudi Arabia, 45% say they are neutral on this question. The UAE has said 47%. So we haven't done any research on this, but we assume that it might be the effectiveness of China's pushing back against the Western narrative or the UN narrative that China is committing a human rights violation or atrocity crimes in that context. So this is something that requires further research, how, why the region views, what has impacted the region views. So that's one reason. It might be due to China's effective strategy of countering the narrative that China is committing atrocity crimes. Secondly, it might be that the public in these two countries are following the respective government policies. When it comes to the official government policies towards the Uyghur question in China, they have been public. The government officials in Saudi Arabia and UAE, they have publicly supported China's policy in Xinjiang when it comes to Uyghur population. At the United Nations, they have voted alongside China. And when there has been a resolution condemning China, sponsored by the Western countries, many of countries in the region, in the Middle East, in the broader Muslim world, has also opposed those motions, those resolutions, that has attempted to condemn China. So it is two issues that we think might have affected the public perception or the public views on this question. Either the effectiveness of China's countering such narrative, or the public is following the official government narrative or policy. So yeah, that's the findings of the public opinion survey on 6 domains. And as a conclusion, do you wanna go with that?
Sure.
What does it mean?
Sure.
for the
What does
product?
it mean? Well, China has done well. China has done well to promote its image as a reliable partner, done well in promoting its political model of emphasizing social stability, strong government, strong state, and has done well partly because the US has made a mess of everything. So it's not always because China has been doing everything right, it's also because the US has done things so badly, so that people are looking for alternatives. And the alternative model of China, I mean, this is one thing that Arif and I have debated and discussed a lot, because we have some limited data that need to be also tested qualitatively to make sense of it. For example, on the Uyghur question, why are people taking an indecisive view on the Uyghur question? Because in the West, we're getting so much reports, so many condemnation of China's treatment of Uyghur. Now we accept, widely accepted, that China is engaged in an act of cultural genocide in Xinjiang. But that doesn't seem to resonate with Muslims in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And you would think, well, why not? Why is there no sense of Muslim solidarity in this question? So it's something that needs to be explored further. Is it because people that were responding to the question accept the government point of view on China, and the government line is that it's an internal Chinese matter that need to get involved? So that's adding qualitative research to what we have done is going to really enrich our findings. And I think we are seeing a pattern in terms of China's position in the region, and the way this is going, we can only expect, and this is you don't need a crystal ball to say this, but we can expect China's position and attractiveness to grow as the US makes a mess of more things to come. And we did, thanks for mentioning this, Arif, we did conduct this survey after the October 7 attack and the war in Gaza and the escalation of tension and the US vehement support for Israel and vetoing of UN Security Council resolutions against Israel. So the US's standing was already on the nosedive when this survey was conducted. So this could possibly, I think we have to allow the fact that this would have affected the respondents' sentiment. But it's not a decisive one, because this has been a long, ongoing challenge for the US image in the region.
Before we open up to questions, just let me add one final point on this. Well, the finding of this survey and other similar surveys that has been conducting on a regular basis, especially by Arab parameters and the Pew Research Center, it does show that the power dynamics in the Middle East is changing. It's no longer like many other regions of the world. It's not a unipolar order where the United States used to be the dominant power, the dominant superpower, extra regional power. And like many other regions of the world, the Middle East is also undergoing that shift, that changes in power dynamics. and with growing Chinese power and influence and status across the globe, especially in the Middle East. So the two countries has to share the region as two dominant powers. So the United States is no longer the most dominant in the region. And it doesn't mean that China is trying to replace the United States or push back against the United States, but they will be increasingly cooperating on some issues, sharing the region. So that's the final thought.
Yeah. So we don't have a chair, but we are happy to field the question.
Yes.
I have a question about Uyghur issue. Don't you think, because it's a domestic issue and it's like, part of the country, but if in comparison with the US is like supporting Israel for Gaza, and it's like, don't you think it's chipping on, like, because it's ambitious for US to join Israel, but for China it's like domestic issue. Do you think it's like, Chechnya and Russia?
So I think the Chinese have insisted that what's going on in Xinjiang is a domestic matter. And they have denied cultural genocide, obviously. They call re-educational camps. And because a lot of the countries in the Middle East have growing economic links with China, I think they are happy to forfeit that sense of Muslim solidarity and concern and not raise that. I remember there was a question posed to the Iranian supreme leader on this very point, and he was asked, "But Ayatollah, what is going on? No, our brothers are being massacred in Xinjiang. Why is Iran so close to China? Why don't you raise this?" And the supreme leader responded by saying, "This, you have to think about the matters of the state. Matters of the state, that is Iran, supersedes all these religious considerations." This is a repeated pattern in the case of Iran, but it's also a repeated matter in the case of other states. Other states have more pressing issues, like having economic ties with China, like having China's investment in their infrastructure, and that supersedes any emotional or religious concerns they might have towards the Uyghur. So I understand that at the state level. The question is, why is this replicated at the social level? That's the question that I think we need to really explore further. They were puzzled.
Yeah, just to add to that point, the state-to-state relations, as Shahram mentioned earlier, that China has signed strategic or comprehensive strategic agreements with many of these countries, especially in the Middle East, including the Saudi Arabia and the United States, UAE. So part of that agreement is to support each other's positions on the regional and global level, take similar policy positions on international issues, but also they include clauses that refrain each parties from interfering in the domestic affairs. So as you mentioned, China sees the Uyghur issue as a domestic issue, and for that reason, based on those agreements that they have, that also sort of prevent government to take the opposite position on that issue, or to criticize China for what's happening with the Uyghur population. So that might play a role as well.
Thank you.
How does the answers about the political values, Chinese attraction of the Chinese political system, compare with the Arab Barometer, Global Survey, Pew surveys? Is it also low in those surveys? These UAE and Saudi Arabian people's understanding of human rights, authoritarian systems, are they all authoritarian that much? Because this was a little surprising. Only 20% support for democracy, human rights, etc., and 60 whatever support for Chinese political system.
We haven't exactly checked on that particular question, but part of the reason that why we focused first on in the Gulf region, for this public survey on Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran, and UAE, because there was a gap in the data. You mentioned the Arab Barometer, the Pew Research. They do cover Middle East and North Africa as a broad region, but for some reason, we don't know why, none of these two entities, Arab Barometer and Pew Research, cover Saudi, the Gulf region, Gulf states. So we really don't know. But the findings of this survey in terms of how China is winning, or how Chinese soft power projection has been effective, paying back in that region, is confirmed the broader MENA surveys that has been conducted by the Arab Barometer and the Pew Research Center. So they also find the same positive perception of China in that region.
Yeah, I don't agree to that. It's service, yeah.
So, I mean, that is really a good question. Why are 57% of respondents in Saudi Arabia think that the Chinese political model is something to follow, is a good role model? Why? And this is where qualitative research data can come in. Do they actually understand what that political model is?
Exactly.
That would be the first question to ask.
Exactly.
Because they might have an idea, but do they know how it works? So that could really make a difference in the way they respond. If they had a better sense, they might respond less favorably.
Yeah, to clarify, to make it easy, comprehensible for respondents. That's why we had to unpack it rather than putting political system, governance system in China. We put in.
But that was the
cut them
focus
in
of your
pieces,
research.
yeah.
You were looking at soft
Yeah.
power.
Yeah, so that's why we put it specifically a strong state, social stability, economic development as a key component of three key pillars of China's political
big
system,
picture.
political governance. And then to measure it that they understand, we also put the United States governance system, a focus on liberal values, democracy, human rights, to give us that sort of indication. Yeah, we had this issue that the respondent may not understand if you put the political system in China. They may not know about this. But as far as I remember, I think these two other research surveys, public opinion service conducted by Arab Barometers and the Pew Research Center, I haven't come across such question that is the political models. I haven't seen it. Maybe you can double check it.
Well, is there a question online?
No,
Feel free
I
to
think,
unmute.
yeah, I've just muted them. No question though.
No question.
Okay.
You have a question.
No, I was just following up that the Saudi Chinese political model, maybe the Saudis feel comfortable. It might make them feel that it resembles their way, their worldview. Being dictatorial, they might say, well, these guys are.
So exactly, I mean, that is the question. Are we talking about political culture in Saudi Arabia? And the political culture is authoritarian, prone towards strong state, limited civil liberties. Is that what this reveals? That's what we don't want to push that argument too far, because there are implications to that argument, obviously. And especially noting that that argument doesn't sit well with the findings of other surveys like Pew and Arab Barometer in other parts of the Arab world that actually shows a strong desire for good governance, civil liberties. So, yeah, that's going to be our next project. There's only so much we can fit in one paper. And this paper has actually been submitted. It's not going under revision. So hopefully we get it published sometime later this year. Hopefully.
Please share Academy channel or political science channel.
It's the political science journal. Which one is it?
Oh yeah, John.
Ah,
Yeah.
What?
International relations.
International.
International relations. Yeah. I think you this very great contribution to to understanding China in the Middle East. You might have a target on the pet. The AI journal is really good, but I found your findings fascinating, very kind of interesting, but not surprising. So if you look at it globally, so the main finding, like in Asia this year, when they asked if the conflict come out, the majority Asian country, 51% in favor of China, 49 for United States. So those shifting already going on in Asia. And the Middle East can be regarded part of West Asia.
Yeah.
And also shift happening in Africa. So if you look at Africa survey, similar kind of result. So like a few years ago, when asked the question of the global leadership, so Chinese, the majority of Africa countries recognize the Chinese global leadership much higher than the United States.
Right.
So those kind of, it's not surprising. So but I just added this, Middle East is fascinating, this area. It's, I think they feel the gap. I have a question, just you're talking a lot of slides about China and the United States. So how do you explain the differences? So you certainly got a lot demographic factors. So does some demographic factor explain, or was the others you also have a survey about their value? How their value at orientation explains their differences? So quantity just report what's going on, but then there's a deep level. How do you explain the differences, attitudes difference towards the United States and China? And have you done any
Yes, so that
any statistics analysis?
Abi,
A bit.
short answer is no.
No, okay.
I think short answer is no, and that there are some limitations to what we could do in the survey, and we had to be very economic with the number of questions we were asking. So if you were to cover those 6 themes and capture feedback, capture responses and sentiment on those 6 themes, we had to be limited the number of questions. So we couldn't ask specific questions about, political values. The big picture is what we have managed to gather, and that we have acknowledged that in our paper, that there are limitations to what we can, the conclusions we can draw based on the
But I
survey.
think you can use your existing funding, just find out the statistics correlation. For example, in the Africa survey, what they found is interesting. Those who are negative attitude towards China always associate their recognition, their higher praise of American system. Those who are positive about China always associated with they think their domestic, their poverty reduction, most important issue. So I'm sure you can find several some in your survey correlation, kind of to explain the difference. But the other, I'm challenging your major arguments.
Okay.
You argue in whole paper, you said you studied the China software project, but the survey itself does not approve or disapprove the effects of Chinese soft power at all. So this is a kind of key. You try to say how China soft power effectively, but the survey does not help.
Okay, well, I'll disagree on that point, because I think what we have discovered is that the respondents have overall positive view towards China.
But it's not the Chinese software, soft power practice or those their effort make differences. You can't establish this causal relationship.
Yeah, you're right.
Because if you are doing that, you need to show that one of the survey how the Chinese some software parts, their confirmation or their highly praised that they relate to their attitude towards China. But currently you can't say that, because that can be anything to do with their own culture, to do with their economic development, to do the US, which you mentioned.
But we can argue that China has been investing in soft power
Yeah,
projects.
you can say that. You can say
So
the
that is
Chinese
it.
soft power has been improved. That's okay. But you cannot say this is caused by the Chinese soft power.
They are not,
The two different things.
they are not saying
Say
that.
that.
You are not saying that, are you?
We're not saying that in the paper, right? So,
I didn't say.
so perhaps I should have phrased it differently today. But it's a question of how China's image is improving.
Yes.
China's image is improving.
But there are other issue I found that you might consider. You mentioned earlier that Chinese soft power largely rely on economic power. There might be very narrow views in the English literature. So it's depends how do we rethink the Chinese soft power. So one of the issues is reflect our value system, because when we talk about value, we're talking about human rights, democracy, it's value. But when the Chinese talking about economic development, poverty reduction, we don't regard it as a value, but it is value. It's a fundamental value, much more fundamental survival value than the rights.
Yeah.
So here, still China, cannot say China only rely on economic power, actually also rely on the political value, but they have different value systems.
Different value system, that's right.
Yeah. And
Sorry
that-
to
that's an important
interrupt.
point.
We do have a few questions online as well, whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Go on, Kira.
Got one from Amanda, if you wanted to read it out.
Hi, everyone. I'm just wondering, with the history of the US actions in the Middle East and their backing of Israel, create a lot of distrust in the Middle East and what they stand for. So, for example, the human rights issues with the Uyghurs, if the US is championing human rights and then supporting what is happening in Gaza, like it just takes away the validity of what they stand for. Would that have an effect on the results?
Yes, Amanda, I think that is that's the point we're trying to make. The timing of the survey coming right after the war in Gaza means that there is already a lot of disillusionment with the United States and disappointment with the US position in Gaza, and that has affected perspectives towards the United States. So in that context, we acknowledge that positive sentiment towards China might have been assisted because the US position is going down. Yeah, there are so many different angles we could explore. I mean, there's a question of hypocrisy in foreign policy making. China has been quite vocal in international fora at UN, talking about what's going on in Gaza. They're talking about bringing justice into international relations. So that, again, that's a value.
Yes.
So that is likely to have assisted the positive sentiment towards China. So what happened of the timing of this survey, we didn't want it to be conducted in such a time of crisis. In fact, we designed it earlier in the year, last year, but it just got delayed and delayed until it got implemented after the war in Gaza. So yeah, that's what we have. You're right.
Yeah. Yes, given the history, I think there would have been a more negative sentiment towards the US regardless. It's
Right.
just sort of exasperated by what's happening in Gaza now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you. I do also have one more question. Has there been an age disaggregated data breakdown? I'm keen to know whether the respondents who prefer China's development partner fall towards the younger or older end of the respondent spectrum.
So we haven't done the age disaggregation, but the age group among our respondents is in their 20s, maybe early 30s. These are individuals who are looking to engage in tertiary education, higher education, and that's how our the agency that, our consultants reach them through their network of potential university students.
So
That's the age.
most those participants are university students.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
That's right. Prospective university
That's
students.
So this is yeah, it does not represent the whole society, just only the
Correct.
university sector. Yeah.
We do have a point in the paper, so
It
perhaps
might interesting compare the similar kind of survey in Pacific Island. They select 3 countries, also target university students. They have a different kind of attitudes towards China.
yeah, that's right. So we do have a point in the paper where we argue that we are dealing with future leaders and intelligentsia of these 2 countries, and that's if that's the view among this younger group, you might expect that the future of these countries will be, going in that direction. So I don't know if that argument is a bit too tenuous, too old
Their views will change, right?
when they get older. Talking from experience.
All good, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
So any difference between female, male, the gender?
Did we get that?
Oh, yeah.
No, we didn't. We have that, but we didn't differentiate. I don't think it's going to make any difference. Yeah.
You're a scientist, you should check. You have the data.
I think most survey most are male. The percentage of female population very low in your survey, I guess. Is that the case?
Most surveys do capture.
The in terms of gender distribution, how many from the male, how many female in your survey?
I didn't pay attention.
Majority of male, I guess.
Yep, that majority
Awesome.
of men.
Majority male, yes.
Fascinating.
Thank you.